view, and this will go into my little segue of yesterday's discussion. So yesterday's discussion, well, not really discussion, but yesterday's one-sided comments was the idea of grammar points. So I thought about this yesterday a little bit. Today you've discovered that I need to take more time when I'm thinking about Japanese. That's great. Lecture, sermon, sort of, just a little bit of refractory reflection. But yes, we'll keep this to like, I don't know what this topic is called. So I don't have like a video idea for this topic, but we'll see where it goes. I haven't prepped this. I actually slept kind of well yesterday. So one-sided, this is the phrase. The phrase that really spawned my thoughts here are called grammar points. And it's not going where it thinks it's going. However, a lot of times, you know, we want abstraction. We want abstraction so that there's less interference, in my opinion. So this is, bear with me. It's kind of, it's going to take a little bit. So abstraction has less interference. So for example, when we were learning a bunch of things, we're talking about des, right? We were talking about des yesterday. A lot of times it keeps going Duolingo teaches things. And for those people who are focused on grammar points, you would put in quotes, teaches things, right? Teaches things without grammar points. Without grammar points, right? So here's the thing. Oftentimes, as we grow older and we acquire more knowledge, a lot of times teaching is the act of deciphering something or being able to fundamentally create something. And grammar points allow us to construct something, right? And that feels more like teaching. When you're learning something, you want to be able to construct something creatively, like a sentence. Sentence is one of the like a sentence structure or an idea gives framework, right? And oftentimes it feels less satisfying when you have to think of words abstractly, where they have no tether or no puzzle or structure. And I absolutely feel that way. There's emotionally, I'm definitely with everyone who has that. And of course, like most things, when I feel a certain way, right? And I have to test it. And I'm going to say my classical phrase, how do you test things? Null hypothesis testing. So the hypothesis here is, why do I feel like I'm just struggling with total recall? Because I'm adding a lot of things that Duolingo is not, right, at the moment, which is association. Things that, and to associate and bring things together, grammar points help a lot. Grammar points is one of the foundations of abstraction. It creates a framework that then you can put everything in. It's like having a bookshelf. If you have a bookshelf that's organized, you can slot in and categorically help yourself sort all the craziness, right? All the chaos. You'd be like, here's a new word. I'm going to shove it into this category, and it helps organize things. It's one of the wonderful things about getting older and having knowledge. You start sorting things, right? Sort categorically. And I most definitely love doing this. In fact, I love doing this so much, I sacrifice what it's like to be an observational learner. So what is an observational learner in my opinion? Well, when you were a kid, this is your only method. Your only method is observational learning. When you become an adult, when you grow older, you rely more on this idea of sorting categorically. So you rely on your experience, and that is a great thing to do. So I do actually highly recommend that if Duolingo was open to it, they would do 2 different types of tracks. One, they'll ask loosely what the age of the person is, like what their experience is. So there's a little like questionnaire or survey in the beginning before you started Duolingo. I know a lot of people aren't too comfortable with disclosing their age, but let's just be real, they probably already know your age at this point on the internet, right? Inconsequentially, you can reveal your age, and past a certain age, using grammatical points as the foundation accelerates an adult's learning process. It's you using what I used to say a lot, or yesterday, it's using the foundation of your knowledge to create framework, and that framework is what you do best. Kids, when you're a kid, you have 0 framework. You are completely observational. So what am I doing here is that I'm trying to tell people that, or I'm trying to demonstrate that I'm actually rejecting doing this grammar point thing, like this grammar point approach, because, and I said this so many times yesterday, that Duolingo's target audience and its organization is kind of focused on a very specific subset, which is like younger people and like young adults. And yes, most older people who are experts or multilingual or polyglot will have criticisms about this. And is it intended that way? Well, I'd like to challenge that. It's probably intended this way. They're focused on observational learning versus grammar points. So they didn't start with grammar points. Look at the evidence, right? Stop saying grammar points if the unit literally says it doesn't go over grammar. So how do you evaluate something if you're not willing to even participate in its method? Which is what led to the whole DES discussion and whatnot. So right now I'm doing observational learning. And that's actually something that I really enjoy. You do that in video games. If you pull up a favorite puzzle game, the first thing you have to do is observational learning. That's it. Like, all the rules are out the window. So pull up a puzzle game, right? Go into Talos Principle or Portal. Even Talos Principle and Portal operates on some sort of grammar point, right? Like, for example, Talos Principle operates on some fundamentals of light. So you still have some grammar points that you can bring in. And grammar points in video games are considered legacy skills. So in Portal, you know what goes up must come down. You know that objects preclude light. Talos Principle, you know walls and objects preclude light. But then they change the rules. And those rules require observational learning. And generally speaking, observational learning leads to the proper development of problem solving. Active problem solving and critical thinking, which nowadays, when people rely incredibly on explicit instructions and rules, it bleeds into their communication skills, it bleeds into their situational awareness. Like, when you talk to someone who is emphasizing grammar points, you are talking to someone who doesn't react dynamically to communication. So when a conversation is starting to go south, their adaptation is just to follow the rules, follow through with the rules that they have, as opposed to dynamically altering your like communication on the spot. So kids are incredible observational learners. When they screw up, they immediately stop screwing up, because they're relying on observational, meaning like they fall down. This is bad. Let's change it right now. You have no interference of what you call grammar points or legacy skills. It takes a long time as you grow older to quote unquote untrain something or change something. And I said the whole thing that I change things. I don't undo them. But changing things still take quite a long time. And the more experience you have, interference from grammar points, the more difficult it is. So no, in a way, I don't focus. I do find that as an adult, if you participate in observational learning, you do actually remember a lot more things. However, later on, you do have to reconcile all your interfering knowledge with the way you're observationally learning. So I am not concerned right now about understanding grammar. I am concerned about how much I totally recall in abstraction, in a vacuum, because I spent this evening, or the previous evening, and this morning doing just that, because I was curious. How do I get this experience where I understand something with 0 grammar points? Guess what? Yesterday, I've talked about this a lot. Someone mentioned that they speak a lot of languages, and that's great. But for me, Fujianese is the language I speak arguably as much as English and hear every day. I have 0 grammar points. There are no grammar points in my understanding of Fujianese. And the reason, or I'm going to say near 0, because I'm illiterate, right? I can't read Mandarin. Doesn't help. Now, here's the thing. Does it stop me from constructing sentences? No, it does not. So what is that? That's observational learning. And I still do that today. So as I'm learning Japanese, I have always wondered, like, how can I structure my Fujianese with that? And I went through and I told myself, I looked up, like, what kind of vocabs do I even know in Fujianese? And sure enough, if I Google this, like, just rapidly run down word banks, as much word banks as I can, I was surprised that I knew nearly 99% of whatever is available for Fujianese. And it's really just casual stuff. Like, you can't get advanced Fujianese stuff because it's not formally there, right? So just because I don't know what when someone puts like refrigerator in front of me, I'm like, I don't remember what that sounds like in Fujianese. And the moment they say it's like, that's refrigerator. So this is what kids do. They observationally learn. Duolingo starts with that. That's what they do. They give you sushi, ocha, no context, no structure. It's the raw nature of, you have to be in the mindset that you're trying to remember those things. You're being exposed to those things. So the difference here is, instead of focusing on actively engaging like some sort of grammatical or higher level function, they're engaging you by mere exposure. And what is this concept of mere exposure? How effective is this? Well, you watch anime, don't you? The way you train your ear is by mere exposure. My parents, I cannot recall some of the specific words in Fujianese, but I know when I hear them say something, I know what it means, and I can't even express it back. Like, so if they say something, I can express it back perfectly with a native language that I can recall more efficiently. So I will use English to respond, and it comes off as Fujianese, Fujianese kind of thing. So here's the idea that we balance, at least as adults, we balance observational learning to intellectual learning. I'll just call it intellectual, like higher intellectual learning. And the more I think about it, the more I ask myself, do I understand how to construct a sentence in Fujianese? And do I have grammar points for Fujianese? And sure enough, it was really fast that I have maybe 2% understanding of what sentence grammar points in Fujianese. However, I have at least a 90% success rate at communicating what I desire to my parents and their friends. So the answer, so what this does is this supports the null hypothesis. Even though I'm an adult who feels that I need grammar points, I need structures. Grammar is my favorite part of language. It's like the technical aspect. I'm a very technical person, but this supports the null hypothesis that do you need grammar points to become as the starting point to build a foundation on how to understand to communicate someone through a language? The answer is no. And guess what? Not only this, the way you learn as a kid supports the null hypothesis. You start with vocab because you're a blank slate, right? You're a observational learner. And then you learn grammar. So what did Duolingo do? Just that. The thing is, I'm an adult. Lots of people who are second languaging, right? Second languaging are at least young adults. So effectively, their first criticism would be, where are my grammar points? And why did I mention the route that I understand things? So at first I said, I start with English, then I jump to Kana. Now I jump back to Romaji, right? Well, if you think about the process of the way you're thinking, you could say, of language, you could say vocab, grammar, and speech. We'll just say speech. We're not going to even go to writing. Writing is, in my arguably, kind of interchangeable with speech, but I actually think the true end game is creative writing or creative speech. So they're kind of like up to your aptitude and exposure. Generally though, now, since you're already here, guys, you know, as adults, you're already at speech and writing, you naturally want to go backwards to the closest thing, which is grammar. Then you go back to vocab. So you ask yourself, what is the most challenging thing about an English speaker trying to build up Japanese? Vocab. That's when they give up. So yeah, they start grammar. Give me that good stuff, because it's the closest thing you have most practice with. I'm talking about the psychology of comfort. So yes, I would love if Duolingo went from starting with grammar, because one step back from what I typically do in my native language now is work on speech and writing. I don't spend 99% of my time building up my vocabulary. I spend 99% of my time speaking and writing. And the next closest thing to that is understanding the grammar structure. And then it's vocab. So we retroactively go back because that's the closest step. It's like expecting someone to say, hey, can you go from kanji to romaji for me? Well, you would go from kanji to kana, then to romaji, because the closest thing from kanji to romaji is kana. So as you go further away, it's kind of like someone who's getting older. They are farther from their younger self. So it's going to take a longer time to establish empathy to someone who is farther in age. So as you go further and further away, it's the human condition. You're traveling backwards to the closest things you have, because memory consolidates that way. When you do total recall, you're recalling the tethers that lead back to that memory. And that's typically what I do. So for this, yes, I am learning much slower because I'm doing something that I haven't done in a long while. And adults the older you are, the more language you have acquired, you're likely to have the same criticism. Like, I would learn faster if they just started with grammar points first. Grammar points provides the foundation of which I can learn anything and sort them. So actually, to me, I am expecting most multilingual people to complain that they don't start with grammars, sentence structure, and like building blocks first, building concepts before they start vocabulary. Now, how does this relate to why I thought about Fujonese? I know nothing about sentence structure. It just comes out, right? So here's an example. I was trying, as I'm learning my Japanese, I'm thinking, can I say that in Fujonese? So let's, I was watching, I'm going to shout out this guy because there's just something about him, the trend, in my opinion. I think this guy started the trend. De facto, he's the core of the current viral trend. And I'm sure some of you've already heard of this guy, but he goes by Xiaoma, right? I think that's what he called himself, Xiaoma, right? And occasionally, whenever I do language, one of his YouTube videos are going to come up. And it's so wonderful because what he learns is in my opinion, he observationally learn conversational like fundamentals or fundamental conversational phrases first, and then use that as the building block. So as opposed to going through like tens of hours focusing on structural and grammatical points right away, right? So how did I learn Fujonese and still retain at least 99% of the casual Fujonese stuff without any understanding of grammar points? I started here. Conversational fundamentals through observational learning. I see that my mother constantly say like, "Why you gonna know?" Right? How do I do that? Well, I didn't learn it by using my intellectual noggin and worry about structural grammatical stuff. I heard it a bunch of times and I know when to use it and how to structure it. And eventually, through observational learning, you actually develop patterns yourself. And those patterns lead to grammatical understanding. So when someone says, oh yeah, well, that's not how des works, or that's not how the wa particles works, but it's a pattern that exists. And that pattern, understanding when that pattern occurs, you can easily get to something you're used to, which is structural and grammatical. You make the transition to that quite a lot easier if you spend more time observing, seeing the patterns, and doing that. If you're not observing the patterns, then I can see it can be very tough because you won't be aware of quote unquote your bad habits. As in, you won't be aware why you see this pattern or you do this pattern. That's a little different from observational learning. You're not actually learning anything. You're just doing the thing without knowing why you're doing it. So when you know why, it's easier to flip on the switch where you're saying, or it's easier to put the puzzles together. So you have all these puzzle pieces. You don't know how they fit together, but you definitely know that you notice the grooves of the sides of the puzzle pieces. But once you start really narrowing down, you know where they place together. So when I was reading the grammar on des, it was a walk in the park, in my opinion. Lots of the like comments are like, oh yeah, but bear with me, this can be hard to understand and stuff. It's like, well, I've seen the pattern like for 20 days straight. I've seen so many patterns that Duolingo has had, and that's how I learned Fujonese. Legitimately, I have no formal schooling. And here's the weirdest thing. I don't know why this sounds normal to me, But if you be thinking like a lot of times grammatical points give you structure, right? We think about, I don't know, noun, verb, object, right? English. And then we think of noun, object, verb, or predicate if you want. Some people are pretty stickler about that, but predicate, right? Japanese. At least that's like a fundamental starting place if you were gonna do a lecture on, hey, we're not gonna tell you any vocab. Here's the grammatical structure. This is commonly where you start if you're an English speaker. It's like, hey, noun, verb, object becomes noun, object, verb. For the most part, that's where our first building block is. No vocab. And what happens here is you do a trade-off. They'll insert Japanese words, right, in here. And what happens is you learn a lot of grammar and you learn no vocab. It's a trade-off. And the idea is to find out which way you learn better. And I would argue that adults, yes, if you go to grammar points, they might absorb enough patterns in vocab to remember vocab words, right? On the flip side, a younger person will be exposed to vocab and they will notice patterns, which then leads to grammar development. So let me do a demonstration for Fujianese. So for Fujianese, I can't even explain these things yet, but let's use a Japanese phrase that I learned recently. Well, actually, I can't even do that. Like, I can't even recall. So let's talk about eating, right? Tabemasu, right? Tabemasu. To eat. A lot of times you would ask, are you hungry, right? Or have you eaten yet? And in Fujianese, it would be ni bu no e koin ma, or ni bu no e koin, right? You're literally asking the person, is your stomach empty, right? And then you start thinking, oh yeah, so in the question, what did I literally say? I said your stomach is like, I'm saying your stomach empty, like, and then I add the is your stomach empty? So you're starting to think, oh yeah, what are the grammar points? Like, how did I know, like, to ask someone if their stomach is empty or if they're hungry, do I put the predicates there? Yeah, that's how you say it in Japanese also. Yeah, so I'm like, so how do you know? And then here's even crazier things. There's evidence where I would structure something in the English structure. And like 外宣言 I want to go outside. I literally said 外宣言 I want to go outside. That's it. Like, in that order. I want to go outside. 外宣言 And now you start thinking, what are the grammar points for that? Like, is it just because the whole thing is a predicate? So is it I want to go out? Want to go out is the entire predicate, right? So then you're going to say, oh, well, that's just a sentence that has a noun and an object, which is still like Japanese, right? You could make that argument. What am I doing here? I'm making grammar rules. I'm making observations about patterns and making grammar rules to fit those patterns. That's what kids do. Kids do that. You observe patterns and you try to explain the patterns. And that's what I did with des. That's how I learned about des. I saw as many patterns. I spend more time looking at the patterns than thinking about all the grammar rules in which it fits. So when you spend a lot of effort doing that, you're thinking like an adult. You're thinking about, oh, how is this related to English? Or how is this related? And then you start using nouns, verbs, like, oh, this is a noun, this is a verb. That's not what I was thinking when I was learning for the first 20 days. The first unit, I was not thinking that. I was thinking this vocab word right here is always in this position. Like always at end of sentence. And then sometimes it's wrong, right? Sometimes I don't have a desk there and somehow it's wrong. And sometimes that's pattern recognition. I looked at the pattern. And then when you go and look at grammar, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's great. And it's like, wait a minute, but there's something off. What about this situation? And then you go look for it and things start falling into place. And that's why I loved when I learned about English. I had tons of vocabulary. Like in English, I talked about this already. Someone asked me what my English comprehension is. I don't think my English comprehension was great. Like in terms of grammar points, my vocab was off the charts. Like I just soaked in vocab. So here's a interesting story because I still remember it because it was the only time in my life where I met with a psychologist. Oops. Wait, what the heck? Hello? Oh, okay. So it's the only time in my life that I met with a psychologist, actually. Weirdly enough. I want to say I was between the age of 14 and 15. Possibly. It's when I transferred between schools. Or between areas, really, between schools. And one of the tasks was they asked me to define words. Like define English words, because we were in English, right? Define words. And oftentimes they would ask me like words that I couldn't possibly, like a kid wouldn't really use these words yet, right? Like we would go with like superfluous. And the task was not to define it in terms of grammar points. I'm saying grammar points here to illustrate a point. All right? When you think of grammar, you think of rules. You think of what it is and what it isn't. So oftentimes when someone sees a word, they're trying to define the word by what they remember. Grammar points is based on total recall. You either remember the grammar point or you don't. It's either you remember the whole thing and it's right, or you don't remember the whole thing and it's wrong. When I was asked how I define these words and I don't know anything about the word, the person told me just say what's on your mind. So, you know, I say like super. I know the super. Super is like extra, right? Extra. And then fluous. I mean, that's kind of like fluid, right? Well, if I have too much extra fluid, then too much. So too much. What's another word for too much? I mean, like excessive. I knew the word excessive already. And that's what I gave the person. I told the person that I would probably describe it, this word probably means something excessive. What's the definition of superfluous? It has feelings. I'm going to say feelings of being excessive. This is a memory that I remember very clearly. Like the way I defined words when I was a kid, so I'm using my observational learning, but at the same time, I'm using parts of it with grammar points that I have, right? And what happens to that? What does that tell the psychology, at least in my opinion, because I've never seen the psychologist again or talked to the psychologist. What I would imagine is this is telling the psychologist that I'm thinking older than I am, like my kids my age. And personally, that's a really maybe a little disrespectful generalization of what an intelligent quotient is. So basically, like, what age are you roughly thinking at over comparison of the people your age? And the intelligent quotient just, it's a ratio between those two. That's why it's called an intelligent quotient. So the idea is I was spotted as a gifted person only because the manner in which I tackle problems involves both the processes. Like, instead of saying, oftentimes when you ask a kid, like, how you define superfluous, and they just say, I don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. That's grammar points. If you don't know the grammar points, you don't know the grammar points. If someone asked me, how is des being used? I would observationally tell them all the times that I've seen des. Like, all the times that I notice des, right? All the times I use it. And describe some of the patterns that I've noticed. This is problem solving. And critical thinking. It's not a projection of biases. When you think of projection of biases, you're talking about opinions. And opinions shape how critical you are. So when someone keeps saying Duolingo, oh yeah, there it goes again, Duolingo introducing something without grammar points, it's like, that is how you learn, for sure, as you grow older. And it also tells me that this person is no longer an observational learner. And that's fine. It works because by that time, you probably accrued so much knowledge that you can more or less not learn to learn anymore, right? You don't have to relearn anything. As far as unlearning things, I'm not a fan of unlearning things, but I am a fan of reconditioning and practicing foundations. That involves relearning things as well. How does one relearn to be an observational learner? You try very, very hard not to be an intuitive learner, right? Grammar points struck intuition because intuition is built on XP. So for us, people who are very successful, probably at learning a lot of language, you probably develop enough strategies to intuitively build on top of that. So yeah, I would start with grammar points if the last thing you did that was very successful are grammar points. For me, what I'm doing now with Duolingo, I am struggling quite a bit. Like, if I have to be frank, I'm not going to use the word TBH or the phrase TBH, but to be frank with myself, I'm learning at a very slow pace. Is that a problem? Absolutely no. Why is that? Because it wasn't ever about speed. Why isn't it about speed? You might ask. It's because I'm learning differently than I usually do. Even though I'm trying to add all the things I normally do, what is this? It's called a challenge. And if you take up that challenge voluntarily, it leads to good stress. If you don't take up that challenge voluntarily, it leads to bad stress. What does bad stress project as? Bias criticisms. Emotional compromise. Right? Bad criticisms, emotional compromise. And what do I mean by bias? Sorry, not bad. Bias criticisms. You're looking at what lacks, which ironically is probably what you lack, because it's a projection of what you desire. And also, it leads to destructive advice. So let me illustrate some things. So, oh yeah, this Duolingo doesn't teach language the way I want it to teach. So when I go and use Duolingo, I feel like I don't have control over how I'm being challenged. So Duolingo is forcing me to do this boring, inane thing that I don't want to do. That's a challenge, by the way. Leads to bad stress because you have no control over it. You have no control over the way Duolingo do things, regardless. So what you do is you accumulate bad stress, and then you start making biased criticisms like, oh yeah, you know, this is not the best way to learn things. This, and then you project your emotional compromise, right? You're upset that Duolingo sucks. So you provide criticism based on that and say, that's great, that's healthy. You're allowed to express yourself. But what it isn't is that it's destructive criticism, because it's a projection of what you lack. You are not making Duolingo work for you. You are not making Duolingo work by what they offer. You want Duolingo to offer you what you know works. So what happens is it's a projection of what you lack. You cannot make Duolingo work. So you focus on all the things that it lacks, and then offer destructive advice. As in, hey, oh man, Duolingo should definitely change up their section 1 altogether, because the science, which is you're the scientist, you have determined that this is not the best way. Versus what I would probably argue, the true science is that in any parallel universe, there's absolutely no way you have more data as a single person than the people at Duolingo. So and I just read this recently, this learning path was changed like not too long ago, like 2 years ago. And people it stirred up a lot of controversy. However, if you want to be scientific about this, you cannot say in any realm of logic that you as a person have more data than Duolingo. Like the organization Duolingo has far more data than you. So what they did was they changed the path and order of what things are learned based on the interpretive nature of their data, like how they're interpreting it, right? Do you have more data than Duolingo? You don't. Alternatively, though, it would be kind of cool if they like shared the data, and then you can make a constructive criticism, right? Like other linguists can look at the same data set and see, oh yeah, okay, I see where it's coming. So there's no transparency. So transparency is a little bit weak. However, we remember that Duolingo is also a business, and that data allows them to continuously get an edge, right? They are entitled to that data because you are using their product. There's a lot of morals and ethics and stuff involved. But what you can say is, if you think taking on a challenge, constantly using language that's indicative of bad stress, offering biased criticisms, and therefore projecting your own inadequacies, in my opinion. And what I mean by inadequacies, I mean these people feel negative when things don't work out for them. Fair enough. It's Duolingo's fault. It's not your fault. You got to hear that. You got to hear that to yourself. Are you blaming the system or yourself? regardless, you're justified in feeling that way because it's part of the human condition. But know for sure that generally speaking, the stuff that comes out of your mouth is destructive. You're trying to change something based on your own preferences. Now, where does this go for me? For me, this challenge has been a challenge I've taken up voluntarily, and I feel great about it. Like, I'm stressed out pretty much every day now because the last two, I have to say, in specifically Unit 8, I've slowed down a lot. Like, incredibly a lot. And I have no problems with it. It's not a deficiency, in my opinion, of Duolingo. It's not a deficiency of Duolingo. Why did I slow down? It's because the skill that they're trying to tax on me, I'm just terrible at it now. I'm so terrible at just taking in things and then relying on pattern recognition. It is so exhausting. The easy way out is to be told why the pattern exists. And sure enough, this summarizes, I would say, 80% of advice that I have been given in the last 22 days. Just, it's easier to help someone by telling them what the pattern is, like explaining what the pattern is. And I absolutely agree with you. And I absolutely love it. Like, I love when people feel that they can't help but alleviate the stress. I just want to make it clear that when people see me stressed out, they think it's negative stress most of the time. And I see negative stress. And when someone goes out of their way to passionately do that, I let them do that. You should do that because you're expressing negative stress, as in all the bad things that happen to you. Like, hey, I want to help you out with this advice because when I was learning Japanese, this made me feel bad. And I don't want you to feel bad about it. But remember that I know I'm not representative of a lot of people. But as a learner, someone who desires to learn, it's all good stress. It might seem like I'm exhausted and stuff, but it's good. I feel good doing something that I suck at. It's not Duolingo that sucks. I haven't done the way Duolingo suggested, and Duolingo has more stats. They legitimately have more stats than me. No matter what I say, no matter how long I lived, they are exponentially getting tons of data compared to me. So if I had to be the most logical person, I can at least humble myself and say, absolutely, I would be able to contribute constructively if I had access to that data set, right? And that's what video game designers do all the time. So here's a little fun little extra thing. So how do I understand, how can I offer constructive criticism, right? My favorite thing that video game designers do right now is roadmaps. Roadmaps, commentary, and patch notes. This is what they can elevate, in my opinion, for lack of a better phrase for the dad jokes out there. They can elevate their game by having a tab where it says roadmap, this is what's coming up, this is the stuff we're working on, patch notes, maybe the last year of patch notes, like what has changed historically. And that's development cycles. So I do think what is really lacking is not necessarily what it's doing, but what information is being transparent, right? And video game developers in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, definitely in the last 5 years, where the industry standard now is that you keep your community up to date about what's going on. And for me, the first thing I thought about is like, wait, I just realized there's no patch notes. Like, I can't tell what they added or what they took away or when they did it. So I had to spend like an hour to 2 hours finding out what was the last change they did. Because now the reason why this came up is because someone asked, add language, like what new things do they want to add, or why did some of their favorite languages have fewer sections? And they would say like, well, the last time they added it was introduced in 2018. Like, those are the questions that crop up. The second most common questions that crop up in my experience. There's no patch notes or roadmaps. As a developer, as an active developer, comprehensive, or not comprehensive, but sufficient roadmaps, patch notes with commentary is excellent. It reduces that speculation that most people do, where like, oh yeah, they don't care about German language, they don't care about Japanese language, or they don't care about my favorite language. And with commentary and patch notes and roadmaps, you can alleviate some of the guessing game. So even though those are ad hominem arguments, you're in the internet, you're going to get ad hominem arguments for batch stress. Batch stress is ad hominem. When someone says Duolingo sucks, they mean the developers suck, not the program. Most of the time, it's by transitive property. They're insulting the people who make Duolingo, not Duolingo itself, because Duolingo itself has no feelings, right? You want to hurt something that's hurting you. And for me, constructive criticism, I know this sounds like a cliche, but generally a constructive criticism doesn't sound negative or positive most of the time. It really doesn't. It just sounds neutral. Like, when you hear someone who is actively constructively criticizing something, it's incredibly dry. It's not emotionally charged because the person really doesn't feel bad or good about it. Well, here's the things that Duolingo lacks, guys. Guess what? When you start off in Japanese, you're going to spend at least, on average, the first 200 to 300 hours not learning about grammar. If you're learning at my pace, obviously. But that's what Duolingo does. Does it make me feel happy or sad? Not really. Like, it's a challenge. I accept it. And where does this good stress come out as? At the back end, I reflect on it. Don't know what data Duolingo works their system on, but in mine and lots of other language learners, the universal opinion of Duolingo is bad in so many different ways, be it personal preference or actually better ways of approaching. Many governmental organizations also have language learning programs for military and diplomatic personnel, and all of them use immersion as their main tool. Duolingo can't offer a full Netflix catalog of materials. Sounds like you know what you're talking about. Fair enough. Can I unpack any of that? I agree with you. That's what I observe. Governments and militaries offer a lot of extra things, right? Alternatives, not substitutions. And then be it personal preference and all the models, which that's the case, which I haven't talked about here. This has nothing to do with that. And then, you can cite as many universal opinions and stuff. I agree, because they say it's bad. I don't represent those people, as per usual. And Duolingo is bad in so many ways. I agree. Or I agree that other people say that. And no, Duolingo cannot offer the full Netflix catalog of material with the business model they have now. So that in itself is a big digression as well. So all those parts, I agree, that's what I observe. I agree with you. That's largely what I observe. So am I talking about any of that in the sense that I'm saying they are not saying that, or they are Like, I'm not making commentary on what other people are saying. So there you go. Thanks for the share. I see that you probably are exposed to a lot of opinions on it. So thank you for the share. Although I am very much aware of that. So where was I about the commentary thing? So I do like that if they add more transparency, that's kind of nice without sacrificing. I don't like that argument because you aren't going to get access to military or government tools for language learning. It sounds like you can only look at what is out there and not what you can actually access. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Just so you know, since we're already talking about accessibility, right? When you're talking about accessibility, that was one of the talking topics, okay? So that's one of Louis Vanon's, I think this is how you spell his name, Louis Vanon's point, accessibility. And well, in this case, for all intents and purposes, it's not bad. I will just use this phrase because a lot of times someone that typed a whole paragraph about a one-sided argument suggests to me that they already have an agenda and probably some emotional take on it, as opposed to some neutral statement, right? Neutral statement that says what it does offer and what it doesn't offer, kind of thing. Also, the pacing is too slow to have any meaningful, which meaningful is one word, but meaningful progress. Less repetition would be better. Duolingo is nice for getting into language learning, but you will quickly stagnate. Obviously, this person's coming into a situation where they decided that they understand everything about what I'm saying. There are programs that offer similar experience. You can also create your own small program. Fair enough. Those sounds like that last one is kind of humorous because that's also the same exact criticism you can say about all the government programs and all the expert masterclasses offered by universal experts. But hey, cyclic arguments happen too. So, fair enough. Hey, guess what? With all that discouragement, I'm still gonna use Duolingo. I'm sorry. Like, you think meaningful progress is pretty funny because I just talked about what I'm learning that Duolingo is inspiring me to learn, and it's the same thing as making your own program. But hey, if the program doesn't offer everything you need, I'm sorry to hear that. This is your personal experience, hence the bias. So your personal experience is citing all the confirmational opinions of other experts to place weight on your personal bias experience. Or you could be talking about just the part where like it's too slow to have meaningful progress, less repetition. I agree that's personal. And I agree with you, that's how I feel right now too. The stagnation thing, probably haven't gotten there yet, but yeah, you're probably referring to that. So fair shake here. That makes sense, that you might be referring to the whole its pacing is too slow, meaningful progress, less repetition would be better, and it's nice to get into language, but you'll quickly stagnate. And I'm guessing you're referring to that personal experience. However, your first statement is not based on your personal experience. And most of the stuff that I'm talking about are not based on my personal experience. Just based on my personal experience, I suppose. So I am also doing the same thing. Although I am not spinning a one-sided argument. So like, you're telling me that there are no people, or like lack of people that like Duolingo and use Duolingo. So yes, I agree with you. Experts, government and military programs have offered competitive alternatives, right? Competitive alternatives to learning language. I agree with you. Competition is great, by the way. Competition is fantastic. Are they different? Absolutely. Duolingo doesn't offer what their competitions offer. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to be competitive, right? They are alternatives. Saying one is bad elevates the other by diminishing one is bad. It's not saying what it doesn't offer, but what it can offer, and then what the other one offers and what it can offer. So instead of demonstrating that the other government programs and other experts offer different things that allows the person to excel, you start off by saying how bad a product is in order to elevate the other ones. So you start off by putting something down to elevate your position. I'm just looking for the most efficient way to use my time to learn a language that can be fun. Duolingo is not that for me. Sounds like you found other alternatives. Excellent. So you're talking, so back to my personal project, right? The lecture, you are projecting. And I respect that. Sorry to hear that Duolingo did not work for you. Right? Sorry to hear that Duolingo did not work. It's not efficient for you. Right? So efficiency is less than desirable for you. Perhaps even not even less than desirable, but maybe even bad. Right? And it's not fun. So you just said it's not fun either, probably. Yeah. Yeah, sounds like Duolingo is definitely not for you. What I was talking about is just this part. I wasn't really even talking about Duolingo per se. I was talking about the mindset of projecting bad stress. So the mindset, the last topic I was talking about is how when you're projecting, it's often a result of bad stress. And then if that bad stress results into advice, that often comes at destructive criticism. Destructive criticism. And often when you're busy projecting bad stress and offering advice that is destructive criticism, that advice doesn't take into account other people and the people and the person you're talking to. So am I using Duolingo to learn Japanese? Kinda, yes. What am I really using Duolingo for? Understanding this stuff. So while you dropped in and wanted to project your negative stress about Duolingo and offering a destructive criticism based on experiences that are not personal and personal, and then offering an advice that doesn't take into account other people, as in the millions of users that use Duolingo and continue to use Duolingo versus the millions of users, probably still millions of users that are dissatisfied with Duolingo. You chose to align and only represent the millions that are dissatisfied versus also taking into account millions of Duolingo users like myself that are still using Duolingo. It's one-sided. So yes, I definitely understand all of this, but this is not my point. Projection is my point. And how bad stress is just bad. I feel that it would be nice in an ideal world for someone like you to have a product that you like a lot. So hopefully you found that product in the vast ocean of military and alternatives to learn language. Am I learning Japanese efficiently right now? The answer is no. So it's not the most efficient way to learn Japanese or learn a language. So your goals are incredibly expressed clearly, and Duolingo doesn't do that. I don't actually think that's the strength of Duolingo. The strength is that whole idea that you said alternatives are incredibly accessible and that it is very fast, right? Brute forcing, efficiency, brute efficiency. Well, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, so I apologize if I'm not that smart, right? I'm not that smart. So Duolingo for me is moving at a pace that I can choose to go faster or slower. But most of the time, I talked about this before, Duolingo is a free product. So they must cater to a lower baseline, and then build up from the lower baseline. If you're looking for the most efficient way, you're looking for experts and specialized programs. And this is not it. I absolutely agree. Duolingo is not a specialized program. Not at all. Not even close. So this is the scenario that I've been in when I was a young lad, and it really made me a very impatient person. So think about it in class. So you have a teacher, right? A teacher up in the front. And you have a kid that wants to go fast because things are too slow. And you have a kid that's going slow and it's just right. Actually, I'm not going to even do negative situations. There's a third kid that the thing is they're too slow or they learn something differently. So Duolingo is this professor that needs to find a way to cater all of these. Usually they pick a baseline between just right and too slow, as opposed to catering to someone who's incredibly fast, which requires a specialized program. Where was I in this situation? I was one of these kids. I was the fast kid. So what did I have? I had a bad temper. I projected negative stress. Like, dude, man, this teacher is going over the same point again because there's some kid in the room that just doesn't get with the program. That was me when I was a teenager. And all the advice, not except for Indy. Indy is fantastic. But there are a few people that I've met over the years. I'm incredibly privileged to be patient with me, right? They're patient with me. I love educating, and I love being a teacher in every way possible. So what do I prioritize? I prioritize the baseline. I do not cater to specialists. If you're a specialist, go and do special things. I love watching people like you on YouTube. Like, I love watching Xiaoma like learn 36 different languages and show that to the world. I love watching that. I'm an educator and a teacher. I pick the one baseline that is sufficient for most people. But if you're moving way faster than all of this stuff, then I'm not evaluating those products. Those products are beyond my expertise as well. So they will be going too fast for me. I spend most of my time in the communal lane, not the fast lane. I used to do that when I was a kid, and ultimately it just led to a lot of bad stress for me. So for me, I don't usually spend that time. Like, oh man, this game is too easy, man. Why can't they just make a game for me, like super hard game? Because this business, I'm the customer. So they should be making hard games that cater to 5% of the population instead of 90% of the population. And then offering step-up build-ups of difficulty in a slow pace, but they can maybe try to skip forward. So, as a teacher, I don't cater to specialists. They're already smarter than me. You already know more than me. A coach is a coach, a teacher, even a psychologist, in my opinion, is already aware of that. If your client walks in and they're talking about things, they are the ones with the problem. They are the ones that know it better than you. So you need to ascertain a type of approach that reaches them in a baseline approach, as in it has to be well enough to get your foot through the door. And Duolingo is a foot through the door. How fast you drop Duolingo is probably how fast you pick up language. So if you only spent Duolingo 3 days, then you're probably out the door and going to your, I don't know, your military grade, like your military expert linguist programs. Absolutely. I'm not here to evaluate that. So most definitely you are correct in all your observations. And I hope you find some good things. I actually don't know enough about language learning programs to suggest anything that is on like expert level stuff, but I know that the stuff that people have been recommending to me, I cannot pay for it yet. So yes, I have $0 tools that get you from 0 to watch X in Japanese. Good for you. Absolutely. You have tools that get you, not me. So since you already learned a lot of language, let's use that language and not presume someone. So yes, you have found $0 tools that gets you personally from 0 and watch X in Japan. In Japanese with some help is enjoyable, not using subtitles. It sucks for the first few months, but yes, absolutely. Guess what? I am a native speaker of English and I watch my English programs with subtitles. So where does that leave me when I learn Japanese and need subtitles? I will still use subtitles in both English and Japanese. It's part of my wonder of how I enjoy things and experience things that you find optional. So there you go. So if you added that thing with some help is enjoyable, not using subtitles, it's not enjoyable using subtitles. I actually literally turn on subtitles because the act of reading, I talked about this a little bit earlier, like yesterday, the act of reading written dialogue in a language you are fluent in, it's creatively different than reading a book with narration and descriptors. So I actively love reading even the language that I understand. I find that enjoyable because when I think of video games often have letterbox dialogue, and I've always wondered how I can portray a country bumpkin in text, portray someone who has a Scottish accent in English. Can you write those right now? If you're a native English speaker, can you write that dialogue? Right? Yours is Anki and card deck? Sounds good. Content of choice to use Japanese skills and get better over time? That sounds like a very effective strategy for you. Point with sub is just example what is possible if you give it full effort. That's implying that you are suggesting I'm not giving full effort. So that's kind of a weird projection, but hey, I'm putting my full effort into Duolingo. So if the point of the sub was that you put in full effort in learning things, then I most certainly am putting full effort into the thing that I want to learn using Duolingo. You haven't, as you're projecting all your things and inferring certain things, right? You're inferring certain things. I can't help but think that you're trying to offer advice, personal advice, right? Based on personal experience, but I can't relate to you. So I can't resonate with you. But if you're thinking about putting full effort, I put in a lot of effort. That isn't just learning language. Like, I didn't use Duolingo to put full effort into learning Japanese. I'm using Duolingo as a platform to talk about how people perceive and offer advice, how they are motivated to provide advice. So, yes, I'm putting in full effort. No, I'm not half baking this. You can put in full effort regardless of the contextual tool. Don't take it personally. I'm just making it coherent sentences. Okay. Alright, so you're telling me I should not take you seriously. You walked into the wrong streamer, Dima. I always take everyone's words seriously. You know why? Because I use full effort to talk to people. Ironic. In my opinion, it's ironic that someone who puts full effort into language would think that to encourage someone to not take yourself seriously. Trust me, I'm not taking it personally. That's perfectly fine. Like, if you think you're hurting my feelings, that's not the case. I'm offering a counter argument. So, all I read right there is you're just making coherent sentences. So basically, you're not taking it seriously, nor should I take you seriously. Can we talk about, yes, right here, right here. This is the GOAT. I absolutely love these animations, by the way. So, all right. Why is it that every time this stream comes up on the carousel, you're arguing with someone? Well, why is it that you're always here and you're still here making a comment about that? Because I can tell you that 20% of the time, I am not arguing, I'm discussing with someone at the beginning of a stream. The beginning of the stream is intentionally for discussions. So perhaps you could ask yourself, why do you always show up when that's happening? Right? That's confirmation bias. but we're not arguing anymore. Well, actually, the guy told me not to take this seriously. Yeah, no one wants to argue. So Kima here. So here, let me summarize what Kima said. Kima found success after like using Duolingo for a little bit, and found out that Duolingo is not for Kima. So Duolingo is not for Kima. So that's fine. And then they found that Anki plus like another way to immerse, because that's a really great word that people use, the immersion technique, to be very effective at learning Japanese. So, and Kima also managed to do this without spending any money. So I'm trying to take in all the points, and the only thing I can say to Kima is that I do not relate to this. So it's not that I don't understand what the person is trying to express, I just do not relate to it. So I did say, I did give the impression that it's personal, but not personal in the sense that I'm offended. It may seem that way. So one thing I wanted to correct is I do put in a lot of effort, just not in learning Japanese, apparently. So I remember all of what Kima says. It's just I want to tell Kima that I do take everyone's word very seriously. I put in full effort all the time in critiquing and discussing what people share. If you are not into that and you don't find, if you find that very discomforting, there are definitely, just like other Duolingo, like alternatives to Duolingo, there are definitely other streamers who don't take people seriously all the time. Yeah, it is your wisdom, for sure. You're sharing your wisdom, and then, you know, oh, wait, here's another great story. It's related to word sharing. So in English, oftentimes sharing is being used synonymously with exchange. So I would like to evoke the idea of exchange, and I am also sharing because you're sharing. And you just told me that you're just making coherent sentences. I don't think you're just making coherent sentences. I think your sentences are super important to me. So I actually really appreciate your coherent sentences. So because I appreciate it, I'm doing an exchange of my own personal ideas. It's not personal in the sense that if you reject what I'm sharing, I will feel sad. It's okay. Like, if you don't believe anything I'm saying, that's perfectly all right. I just care that you're sharing. So in a way, it's implying an exchange. So I'm also sharing my counter perspective. I'm not rejecting your perspective. We're mutually sharing our own perspectives. Hence then, once again, the peanut gallery has shown that it's about argument. But no, I personally do not see it as an argument, but more of a sharing of contrasting viewpoints. And not even contrasting viewpoints, because I'm not concerned with the same goals. Kima's goals is to learn language efficiently. And Kima is offering advice and wisdom on achieving this goal. I'm not. So I'm using Duolingo as a platform to talk about people's own motivations, perceptions, in the context of learning language. So my wisdom is not the same wisdom as Kima. So we are not arguing about a point. about any particular point. We're discussing about our wisdom. And we have different goals in mind. And my only observation about Kima is that this is that person's wisdom. Specifically, this person's wisdom. So that's pretty much where we are left off, right? So let's wrap up this thing. I wanted to wrap it up with the idea that the classroom situation. So, fast learner, average learner, and slow learner. And this box here is a person or an object or a tool or what have you. So oftentimes I'm thinking about what techniques would be useful to the average learner, to the slow learner, and the fast learner. And clearly our guest here is a fast learner that has a tool that I focus on most of the time. And that's problem solving and critical thinking. So when this person found out that Duolingo is not useful for them, they problem solved and found other solutions. They critically think about what Duolingo is lacking for them personally, and then they filled those situations up. So this leads to great alternatives that best effectively maximize their learning potential, right? Alternatives for learning potential. And this is why I have lectures, or lectures to myself. I'm not actually building any masterclass or something for learning. I personally don't think I have enough experience or professionalism to do any of that formally anymore. Okay, so anymore. It's not my professional career anymore. So not only is our guest a fast learner in this situation, they have grown up and become adults with problem solving skills and critical thinking. And that's the whole idea of making your own programs. And when I mean programs, I mean figuratively, not literally. You can solve problems regardless of the situation. And this is the great appeal of successful people. So if something doesn't work, they find something that does work. Now, the slow learner might still be trying to learn, right? Still trying to take in things. So it will be quite a long time a much longer time before they can develop problem solving, critical thinking to find alternatives that help them aid with why they're slowing down. So the slow learner is going to have problems like, how do I speed up if I am not aware? Because in this situation, that slow learner is already having trouble learning with the slow thing, right? To the fast learner. Relative to the fast learner, this is going too slow. But the slow learner is already having problems. Are they naturally going to have time to develop problem solving skills and critical thinking skills to find alternatives for their learning in order to be successful? Well, that's also one of my focus, right? Because my focus is creating awareness of problem solving and critical thinking. So people that I offer advice who struggle with like mathematics and chemistry, I try to put effort, right, my full effort if I can, into developing strategies that maybe I can circumvent the contextual nature and help them with their problem solving and thinking skills first, as in offer them a level of comprehension that they can have time to develop these strategies. And we're talking about young adults here. So not adults that, so right now, all the things I've discussed doesn't impact the fast learner and one that already developed problem solving and critical thinking skills. And then we have the average person. The average person has complacency problems or complacency inconsistencies. So average learner is like, yeah, this is just right. I like doing this. This is just what I need. And what happens is there's no motivation to develop improved problem solving skills or critical thinking because they don't have a problem with the program or the tool or the professor or the teacher. They don't have a problem. So if they don't see a problem, they don't practice problem solving or critical thinking skills. So how do I engage the average learner, the learner that the program is targeting, which clearly the Duolingo program is not targeting a fast learner, right? At least we can make an agreement that Duolingo is not targeting fast learner. And we have to remember that just like this is a complement to the fast learner, the fast learner represents 20%. The slow learner, I'm being generous and conservative really, 20%. And then the remaining 60%, let's just say it's average. I don't know, I'm making this up. We're talking about normal distribution. It's more like 80%, 10%, and 10%, right? Let's just assume normal distribution or Poisson distribution, right? So what am I focusing on? Well, everything I do is focusing on imparting the wisdom of getting someone who is slow, who is fast, really not this, to be honest, because if they are fast learners, they're not going to stay here. So someone who comes in and say, I'm arguing with someone, that's a fast learner. Someone who clearly has problem solving skills and critical thinking skills that will ever listen to whatever I say. So it's, they don't stick around too often, or they don't stick around long enough to actually know what I'm doing, right? Because it's not helpful to them. And then the average learner, which I'm the average learner usually, because I'm not very sharp, not a sharp tool in the shed. At least I feel I'm not. Sorry if some people think I am. We'll just chalk it up to imposter syndrome, I suppose. So here, when I'm thinking about what I was trying to get to today, is that there's a contrast between observational learning. Let's just summarize because I went an hour over what I was expecting to do. So the duality of observational learning and intellectual learning. So let's talk about observational learning. Duolingo is structured in observational learning. It's not structured in intellectual learning. So what is some of the hallmarks of observational learning? Repetition and usually slower pacing. And it does represent that at this point. What am I doing in this context? Why does this remind me of this? Because I do feel slow. But at first I thought it might be the slow pace and the slow repetition. But this had come to allow me to realize that I haven't been doing this in a very long time. So observational learning. Basically, can I just take in a word without needing the urgency to contextualize, move along, and due diligence? And this part, yes, it did slow me down quite a bit. And it's both. And what I can earnestly say is While a lot of people focus on its slower pace and its repetitious nature, rarely do people think about the thing they stopped doing for a very long time. So intellectual learners tend to, in their adulthood, in my opinion, usually ends up becoming faster. They're incredibly efficient, fast, high-paced, and if they're great problem solvers, they're easily, in my opinion, easily impersonal projectors, impersonal as in unsympathetic, not empathetic, but unsympathetic projectors of wisdom that may or may not help the slow learner or even the average learner. So one thing I have to say is I really appreciate Kima. I really appreciate the advice. However, I find it unsympathetic because I don't relate to the problems that you are projecting on your wisdom. And it may or may not help me as advice or wisdom. Because I don't really find myself as a fast learner in your context. So I'm probably not a fast learner in your context because your advice has to be appropriate, right? Contextually appropriate for that person. Since you have a high pace of learning and a high comprehension, most of your advice is very impersonal. And let's not forget that it's 10% fast, 80% average range. These are arbitrary, but we know that average is the bigger pool, and then 10% slow. While I don't think I'm a slow learner, I definitely think I'm more average than I am fast in this situation, especially language. I'm probably a pretty average language learner. So as a compliment to you, I want to remind psychologically that you are exceptional, probably. If you so think so, you are exceptional. But I don't find your wisdom relevant to me, which makes us two different types of pool of people. It's not that you are a fast learner, it's just a good tool method makes you a fast learner. Ooh, I disagree with that. So now we're having an argument. Yeah, I disagree with that. Yeah, I think it's both. One can be a fast learner and use fast tools. So if you use tools, you can't actually know if you're a fast learner. If the tools are making you a fast learner, how do you know you're a fast learner in the first place? You would have to take the tool away and compare yourself to another toolless person. One of the separating characteristics of someone who is fast versus someone who is slow, right? Versus someone slow is often how quickly they solve, how proficient they are naturally at critically thinking and problem solving. And to me, I'm not saying you fast learn because you pick up things very easily. I'm saying you're a fast learner because you can solve problems. So the fast learner has had a lot of time to be able to solve problems, find alternatives. So if you have a problem with Duolingo, you solve it. A slower person to get efficiently to complete their task, it will take them a longer time to find out what is it that will allow them to discover the tools necessary to be a fast learner. So not only do I disagree about this binary statement of 1 versus 0, tools or no tools, I actually think you're both. You're both a fast learner that uses tools as opposed to a slow learner, a slower learner, or even an average learner that uses tools. You can't know until that happens. So it can be both mutually. And based on how quickly you like make counter arguments or like counter points, whatnot, I actually think you do have a lot of elements of critical thinking and problem solving skills. That's actually kind of a nice thing to have, right? For me, yeah, I'm a person who uses tools. I'm gonna say I'm above average. Above average. Not quite fast, not quite average. And I use tools to help me with that. So I evaluate tools for that reason. I evaluate tools and methods because my general concern is the baseline learner. And the baseline learner is usually the target audience. So what is the target audience? Well, your assumption is the target audience is becoming fluent in Japanese, or like do enough Japanese so that they can maybe this is it. I'm not sure. So you know, fluent enough to enjoy content without subtitles. Right? Fluent enough to enjoy without subtitles, for example, right? For this, I agree with you. If you think the target audience of Duolingo is for people to become fluent in Japanese to enjoy without subtitles and anime and stuff, yeah, I agree with you. If I look, so now I have to test if this is true by finding examples, evidence that would say the contrary. Null hypothesis testing. So here's my profile, right? Like my leaderboard. And even when I'm thinking about XP, which is a construct, it's a plain construct, and you look at people's charts and stuff, regardless of their stats, all it points to is people aren't really doing that. They just want to learn some phrases and stuff. So like the comment that Xiao Ma talks about quite a bit that I really enjoy. It's just fun learning some stuff. So we're gonna take the average person's perspective. That mentality is very different too. So that's another, in my opinion, that's another detail that I feel that leads to me thinking that you're a fast learner. The volume you want to learn is a lot and very quickly. I mean, I want to learn a lot of things too, but I'm definitely not as fast as you. As in like the desire to be as fast as you. In fact, I'm having a blast just doing this all day. And I have no anxiousness about this. I've already had this comment from other fast learners because fast learners seek out helping other people unsolicitedly. So another pattern of fast learning is they seek out people they can help. And that's a really great thing. It's a very passionate thing. They go out of their way to offer unsolicited advice. Because they want other people to learn really well and efficiently. When you're a fast learner, you get used to being very fast. I am not fast per se because I desire not to be. I typically slow down to appreciate other things. So here, a fast learner would be like, dude, And I already had this response. Dude, you just wasted the last 2 hours not learning Japanese. Well, I guess you could say I'm a country. This comment, yeah. Dude, you just wasted the last 2 hours not learning Japanese. And you can say I'm a country bumpkin. I am a country bumpkin. And opposing Italian. I'll let you get cultured for that, I suppose. I'm a country bumpkin. And opposing Italian. And I like living life in the slow lane. We'll call it in the average lane. Because what makes learning language incredibly rewarding to me is that I get to have the opportunity to interact and learn from and hear from people who like Japanese. And that's it. So what does that mean? It means meeting people who disagree with me so that we can discuss about it, right? Share. Meeting people who hate Duolingo. Not you, obviously. I don't think you project it in a manner that you absolutely hate Duolingo, but I have already met people who hate Duolingo or actually even blame Duolingo for wasting their time. And regrettably, this is kind of dealing with the whole like slower learner, but also lacking critical thinking and problem solving techniques. Ali, loving this conversation? Oh, thanks. I don't get that comment too often. Breakman. Usually, most people tell me that I'm talking up my butt. I'm talking up my butt. I don't know what that means, but I'm gonna stick with it. Talking up my butt. With 3 T's. I always spell butt with 3 T's. Because I have a big butt. I give a lot of big butts. I'm a very big butt person. Okay, that was kind of lewd and out of context. But with 3 T's. But thank you. I dawdle a lot. It takes a very long time for me to talk about things. But in my opinion, learning is more fun at a slow approach. You know, you like the whole thing of it. Enjoy the journey. Exactly. I love enjoying the journey. Thank you. Understanding the ins and outs since it ain't a marathon. You know what's funny? Most people think a marathon is too short, right? So oftentimes the idiom is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Enjoy the journey, right? But now I have to say something bigger than a marathon. It's not cross country. Hey, it's cross country. You gotta enjoy the view, right? When you're running cross country, you gotta enjoy the view as well. Breathe it in, look at the sunlight. I totally understand the whole internet hustle culture, right? So yes, absolutely. Internet hustle culture, if the hustle culture is for you, go do it. Go be as efficient as possible. Find your one goal. What do I get from enjoying the journey? I get to meet a lot of people who have different paces in learning. A lot of people who are upset, unhappy, really happy, enjoying the experience, developing bonds, right? And I talk about this a lot because I'm a person who have burnt out before. So in other contexts, I have talked about burnout before. Am I above average? I am above average. Not in what I do today. The stuff I'm talking about today, all these things, I have learned to slow down and enjoy things I'm not good at. So I'm above average before. As a kid, I was above average into my, I'm gonna say into my late 20s. Into my late 20s, I have always been above average. Like fast, high-paced, gotta hit the ground running, right? And now I'm almost 40. I'm almost 40 years old. So I've learned, I've slowed down. I've done this already, and now I'm no longer pressured to do so. It's no longer about maximizing my time in terms of the goals I can see. It's now about slowing down. It's now about slowing down and maximizing what I'm not good at, because it creates serendipity, which I can't spell. So we're just gonna spell it this way. Serendipity. So yes, I want people to argue with me. I want people to tell me that I'm wasting my time with Duolingo. I want these encounters because I'm enjoying the journey. I'm enjoying hearing things that I wouldn't otherwise hear if I was on the fast lane. And I lost that. And how does that relate to that? It relates to burnout. I told people that one of the crises that I've met in my life, was I was burning. I wasn't just a candle burning at both ends. A candle burning at both ends. I was Icarus that already slammed into the sun and started swimming. I was Icarus that slammed into the sun and continues swimming. And I hit a breaking point, I'm gonna say around my 30s, where I took a look in the mirror and I saw this guy who was underweight, like well underweight, juggling like 18 out of 24 hours of stuff, and then the last 6 hours was used to maximize my quote-unquote free time. So I gamed within those 6 weeks. So what did I do for those 18 hours? Well, I did science. Lots and lots of science on top of juggling and mentorship and stuff. So I was most definitely always finding the fastest way to do things. Is the fastest way leading to the best way? That's arguable, but usually I don't even use the word best anymore, or fast or slow. I tend to use appropriate. Appropriate is the word I use now. I go at an appropriate pace, and I offer appropriate advice if solicited. I generally don't offer advice in any other context other than to myself. So if I'm streaming and people happen to be hearing me rant about something, it's not advice for the people who are listening. They can choose to use it if they want. I'm actually recording my learning sessions and streaming sessions for myself, just for posterity. And I hope that maybe something comes out of it. What does that sound like? It sounds like serendipity. So I'm not selling anything. I don't even have a goal in mind. Like I'm not gonna educate you. I don't have the goal of educating you in Japanese. Like, don't get me wrong, that would be kind of really great as a skill, but I'm not here to educate you in Japanese. I'm not even educating you in how to learn. This whole digression was about me reflecting. The start of this entire discussion was me reflecting on Fujonese and how I observationally learn Fujonese to this day. And that's what and it reminded me of how Duolingo structured their first section, which I haven't completed yet. Section 1 is how I learned Fujonese. I just took random things, like they just throw things that occur very regularly. My parents, they always talk about food. They always talk about going somewhere, coming back, buying groceries, and they only say thank you, hello, and stuff like all that out of context, no structural grammatical points. And that's how I retain Fujonese. And any record online, both military and government and Duolingo or anything, when I was looking yesterday for 5 hours, I think I managed to peruse like the 80 or so hits in Google search. Obviously that's where I'm gonna go as a starter. 99% of that stuff covers the things that I use in Fujonese. And I have no formal training in any of that. And what I was saying about Duolingo is section 1 reminds me of that approach. And that's usually an approach that came when I was a kid. And now what happens when I'm doing that approach? I'm so slow at it. It just sucks. It really sucks. It really sucks. But I wanted to remind everyone that this is positive stress, as opposed to negative stress, which is what, and then this is when Kima came in and talked about how it's negative stress for that person. So that's understandable. You would want to quit something that's giving you negative stress. It's too slow, it's too repetitious. And for me, this is positive stress. I am very slow at this. It's reminding me how I used to learn as a kid. The way I picked up Fujonese is because I heard the same phrase like 8 billion times, to the point where it actually gave me a bad temper. I got really upset when I keep hearing the same phrases over and over again, constantly. And my parents keep lecturing me over and over again about the same things, constantly. Now I don't. In fact, learning Japanese at this pace, when I was observationally, gave me time to think about how I learned Fujonese. Yeah, this is reminding you of how you learned in school and it feels great. Yeah, it's been a really long time. Like, I haven't learned this way in a long time. Just so everyone knows, again, as a reminder, I've been in education, like, I would even argue to this day, even out of education, I spent 95% of my time in education. And even at the level of like PhD, once you leave a certain perspective, like I would say once you become older than 18, you start observing things in a different perspective. And oftentimes anything that's outside your perspective becomes negative. It becomes a negative stress. So nowadays I slow down because I suck at it. I suck at slowing down, really. I suck at slowing down and letting other observational skills take over. So what is the charm of repeating the same thing? Well, now I got a chance to think about all my Fujonese experience, all my Spanish experience. I got a chance to tell stories with friends or with people I've met, like Indy. We exchanged lots of really peculiar observations because our goal isn't necessarily how fast we do the goal we set out to. but the journey along the way. Not negative, just crunching it in less time with an efficient learning algorithm. Not at all that different. It is absolutely different. Like what you just said, if you're telling me it is not all that different, I cannot even comprehend expressing how how off the mark that comment is to what I'm doing right now. Crunching things in less time with an efficient learning algorithm, I'm legitimately not doing that. So it's really that different. It really is that different. Unless you're talking to someone else. You might be talking to someone else. Sorry, I just realized I missed a couple messages. So you might be talking about someone. Also, with languages, you get to enjoy new communities, and that really opens up your mind to new cultures. So it's quite fun to take it slow and let the whole thing embrace you. I wouldn't say I'm a slow learner nor a fast one. ADHD makes learning quite funky. Understandable. Understandable. In terms of like the idea of ADHD, again, I've only seen a psychologist once in my life. And that was because of the whole like gifted story with language or vocabulary and stuff. But generally speaking, I would not be surprised. I've said this to my loved ones and friends all the time, but I would not be surprised if I had some characteristics that may be very relatable to people with ADHD. So it's not uncommon that the people around me, when I'm talking about certain things and certain strategies and whatnot, people with ADHD finds it appealing. However, I do not know. You can make it slower. I just made it faster since I had the time. Oh, actually, that's a pretty good point, Kima. That is a pretty good point. So, when you said you want to make things faster because you have time, right? And I have time to make it slower. That's actually quite great. I actually think I can get behind that. I definitely can get behind that. It is definitely not much different in that manner. I can make it slower and you can make it faster because both of us have time. Fair enough. That's actually very sound. I dig that. So now we can reach a commonality here. So we've reached the bridge, right? So at least we're not in the ballpark where we're having trouble understanding each other, right? So my appreciation of full effort now is slowing things down and observationally taking in as much as I can. As I can. In the meantime, you're making things faster because you're becoming more focused on the task at hand. So your focus objective is to learn, say, X language as quickly as you can. It's very focused, it's pinpointed, it's optimized. I'm basically doing the opposite because I have time to do so. I spent most of my time doing what you have done, and I'm okay with not doing it anymore. So back in the day, you know, it was fast, always fast. It was so fast that I slammed into the sun. And funny enough, internet hustle culture is a great example of that. Slam into the sun. I don't really particularly like that anymore. So if most of those people, they usually fly by me so fast. It's okay. You know, I'm driving at 5. Sorry, I'm American, but 50 miles per hour with a speed limit at 50 miles per hour. And, you know, it's still okay to go 70 miles per hour and pass me on the fast lane. Go for it. Meanwhile, I'm having a conversation and just taking in a conversation with, if you say, well, you could have friends and talk to it. Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm also having a conversation with myself too. Right? There are things we both do that are very alike. And the only difference, I guess, you could make is that we're moving at different speeds. What we observe at 50 miles per hour is not what we observe at 70 miles per hour. So that's where we disagree about the whole, like, in less time with the efficient algorithm. When you're moving life at 70 miles per hour, you definitely do not look at life the same way at 50 miles per hour. It's remarkably different. And being in the fast lane and then now being in the slow lane or slower lane changes one's perspective. So that's good. Pretty good wrap up for today. It went kind of long. I only wanted it to go like an hour, right? So we slowed down a little bit, which is ironic, right? Gotta learn some Japanese. But yeah, thanks for the share, Kima. I don't necessarily think that if I had to use the word appropriate again, fast refers to the volume, more new words a day. Fair enough. Okay. I mean, if we're talking about relatives, I could just change these to volumes if you want. But yeah, I mean, that's a conditional. I'll keep that in mind. Fast refers to volume. I mean, in case of volume, right? Volume, the closest thing to the life analogy for volume is time. Really, not necessarily volume. So like, how much volume do I accrue going 50 miles per hour? Well, you could measure volume in distance, I suppose, because distance is one dimension of volume. Perhaps I travel less distance, but I had more conversation and thoughts. But perhaps you could argue that you have just as much conversation in the distance that you've traveled. Right? You just reach the end of the deck faster in days, but it takes about the same in hours you do? Yeah, but you aren't doing the same thing I'm doing. That's the difference. You definitely reach the end of the deck faster, for sure. And I definitely I definitely do not reach the end of the deck as you do. The volume is the same. Because where I decide to distribute my volume, you are not distributing. Your volume only includes the deck. My volume does not include just the deck. You're focused. I'm unfocused. So I don't just collect volume from the deck. I collect something else from the deck. Or like, not from the deck. I invite things into my deck. So if your deck is composed, say your deck is this. Right? My deck is this. Whoa, that sounded a little lewd. Here's your deck. I will most definitely get to the end later. Whoops. I put an extra T. Because as I'm going through the deck, other people's decks are being added to my volume. And that's why it's still speed, because it's a rate at which you reach the end of your deck. You're focused. This is very focused. This is unfocused. The deck is larger because it's unfocused. It includes other people's decks, other objectives, other things. And you don't know them. Deck is a technical term there. Well, if you want to focus on that it's a technical term, this analogy is still is relatable to a lot of people. Your focused deck, your priorities are smaller than my priorities. My priorities include yours, but it's not the only priority. You want to learn language very fast. I want to learn culture while learning a language. I want to get to know the community. Oh, the Anki? That's fine. We don't have to make it literal. You don't have to say literal stuff. We're not using literal stuff, just figurative stuff, right? Let's expand our horizons just a wee bit. Just hear me out a little bit before constantly rejecting the analogy. If your life is very focused, you'll get it done faster. Absolutely. Like, you're very focused. That's nice. I just don't spend my time focusing on that. If I'm trying to complete your deck and someone else has another deck to share, figuratively, I'm saying figuratively, it's not really a technical term, it's a abstraction. Figuratively, their deck becomes part of my deck. I spend time talking to Indy every day. Like, whenever Indy shows up, I create a story that deals with learning Japanese and linking it with Fujianese, which makes it less focused. Why did I spend 2 hours talking about this and not learning Japanese? Because I have other people's decks. Other people's decks and other people's interest. When I was burning out, I was a specialist. A specialist is impersonal. They only relate to a very specific subset of people. So a specialist tend to be trading off charisma. So it's about what I think, what I find technical, what is important to me, what I want to focus on, what I want to achieve. Someone derails me with one question. Like, if Indy says something, I'm gonna derail and my deck is gonna be gigantic. Am I ever gonna get to the end of the deck? No. I'm not even close. I don't think since I've met 2 or 3 people learning language, I haven't ever achieved my goals at the end of the day. Like, if I went into the day thinking that I was gonna complete a lesson that I planned, nah, it's probably not gonna happen. The moment someone says something, I'm gonna derail for them, because that's the journey. Does it make me happier? Yes. It certainly doesn't help someone who doesn't care about anybody else's deck. So, or care less about someone else's deck. And I know you said that you are offering wisdom. Offering wisdom. But I would graciously and respectfully ask yourself, did I ask for that wisdom? Even though I welcome it. I still accept it, obviously. But generally speaking, when you're really focused, that's how you become more efficient. You only talk about the things you're interested in. You rarely, or you try not to spend too much time entertaining other people's point of views, because it will distract you from your focus. So when someone talks to me, I would say, oh, sorry, I don't have time to talk about that because that's not my focus. I need to learn Japanese. So if you're going to talk about Spanish right now, I can't talk to you about Spanish. This is a Japanese only learning channel. I don't say that. And it won't frustrate me if someone continues to talk about Spanish. We already talked about Spanish, French, Polish. I had a Russian person who couldn't communicate with me, I suppose. And I always talk about Fujianese. Random Mandarin stuff, because I met a couple of Mandarin people who caught me writing, counting 1, 2, 3, like counting to 10. And then I wrote some like, talked about Chinese, right? Quote unquote Chinese a little bit, because I have a Fujianese background. That stuff took up like an hour. And I love it. It's fantastic. I know 2 or 3 people who aren't even interested in Japanese. Like, they're just not interested. What they talk about is how learning language is exciting. Is great. So we spend a lot of time talking about how it makes us feel. Both the good, the bad, the however, like how frustrating it is, all the weird things. So that's kind of the thing I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, that's getting to know community. Hey Lotus. Genki desu ka? Lotus is the guy that used Genki desu ka first, right? And every time I see Lotus's name, I think of Genki desu ka? Is Anki gonna teach me that? The answer is no. Because it doesn't say Lotus reminded you of Genki desu ka? It can if you want to. Lotus, that's interesting. I disagree with you. Fundamentally, in every way, logically. So somehow you managed to know Dragon Lord Lotus by saying Anki. Hey, guess what? Dragon Lord, so Anki is gonna say Dragon Lord Lotus wanted to tell you what Genki desu ka means. Go for it. Personally, go for it. Convince someone. Try to convince someone other than myself, because I already had it happen, that you can do that. Go for it. That's the journey, not the goals. That's the journey. I wouldn't have ever anticipated that Dragon Lord Lotus will forever remind me of Genki desu ka. I think it's way easier to have real people you remember things about versus trying to make up stories. Lotus, what do you think I'm gonna say to that? I'm actually kind of curious. What do you think I am gonna say about that? I feel like we know each other a little bit well enough that I think maybe Indy might know what I'm gonna say about that. I know you are saying that about how you feel, but what do you think I'm gonna contribute to that? It starts with a B. Not but with 3 T's, but both. I like doing both. So No. But what I mean is, I agree with you. I actually understand what you mean. I definitely feel that way too. Generally speaking, if I had to choose, I wouldn't choose either. I just do both, right? You know what I mean? Like, might as well do both. And that's what we do all the time. We like talk about, like, for example, right? This kanji, right? This kanji. Yeah, this kanji is Indy's creation. I'll never forget this because this means 10 mouths. And when you have 10 mouths in the same room, you're old. But because you told me this doesn't describe a person, that's how I remember it. So, not only do I remember that this is 10 mouths, where Indy, 10 mouths, where Indy is old, but I remember that Lotus, you told me that people don't use this word to describe people. So, this is how I remember this. We won't ever forget this. And the reason why is because if you flip it on its side, it kind of looks like jewel, you know, jewel kutsi, kuchi, or kuchi, like the mouth, kuchi, kuchi. I haven't done any Japanese today, so kuchi, right? But the way I came to this was because it's related to whoops, wrong stroke order. Yamaguchi, right? Yamaguchi. But this is I think I've seen this somewhere as the kanji for chi, right? But anyways, if you flip it vertically, 10 mouths. And that's how we came up with the 10 mouths, which is connected to being old because we had the story about the generational thing. Especially my grandfather, image of my grandfather came up. And then later on, like I would say 30 minutes later, I used this in the terms of being old. And then you mentioned that, yeah, people don't typically use this kanji to describe people. So, and then I talked about the first time this kanji was used is to describe saifu, right? A wallet. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I don't have anything that isn't an object yet, which I didn't know yet because we haven't really gone through like if there are even any usage rules in Duolingo. If there is, that's great. If there isn't, I can thank you for this usage rule, right? Okay, let's wrap it up. One last message. It's about the journey for me. And wait, let's make this a little bit more scientific. I'm more about the kinetics, not the thermodynamics. But then again, this analogy kind of falls apart because kinetics do deal with rates, while thermodynamics deal with like n averages. But life's a journey. I wanted to talk about the story about Fujianese, but I'll get to that while we're learning because it's gonna come up, the Fujianese stuff. Anyways, that's a good segment. I don't know how I'm gonna summarize this segment, but yeah, nerdy way to make an analogy. Yeah. yeah, that's the science side in me, and I'm not even a chemist. Kinetics and thermodynamics, let's just say those are some principles that are only dealing with the methodology of some of the tools that we use in biology, but it's largely more of a colligative property and chemistry related thing, and I wasn't a chemist. I haven't been a chemist for quite some time. All right. So it's time for a review lesson. Oh, before I do it though, since I finished the digression, I want to take a bathroom break. I'll be right back. Thanks.